Now I've got this BSA A65 crank set up in a lathe here, and this is from the bike whose engine was making some rather clattery noises, which apparently seemed mainly down to a loose timing pinion as I sort of got into the engine and started stripping it and investigating. But we've also got a lot of wear on the timing side bush and the journal on the crank, and I had this matter of the drive side roller main bearing, the inner race, being a very sloppy fit on this part of the main shaft here. And with one thing and another, I had more or less decided that perhaps the best thing to do would be look for another crank and start again. But thinking about it some more, I've come back to it, and especially after discussing it with my rebore and regrind guy, he reckoned that it might be possible to shim between that shaft and the inner race of the bearing. So I've measured the play between the two, and I can get a 4,000th of an inch feeler gauge blade between that part of the main shaft and the inner race of the bearing. So we're looking to take up at least 4,000ths of an inch. With all that in mind, I decided I'd set the crank up in the lathe as we see it here, and just spin it and clock it and see what I've got. Now I've got showing 3,000ths of an inch run out there, gripped on the splines that drive the engine sprocket. Now, between any possible wear on those splines, and I've just got the 3-jaw chuck where the 3 jaws move together, it's not as precise as the 4-jaw chuck, which maybe I might have been able to set up to show no run out there, but at this stage I'm not too worried about that. 3 thou there at the moment is okay for what I'm doing, especially as over at this end, held by the centre at the tailstock, we're clocking no run out at all on that part of the shaft there. So between there and there we've got 3,000ths of an inch run out. Now that run out could be uneven wear on this part of the shaft where it's been a sloppy fit in the bearing, but it basically gives me hope that perhaps we might be able to get this just skimmed very lightly and cleaned up, and then use appropriate shimming or even a very thin walled collar in there between it and the inner race of the main bearing. I'm going to come back to this crank in a moment because we've got some rather more excessive run out right on the end of it where the alternator rotor fits, and there is some wear on that. But basically, if this slot can be salvaged, it's worth worrying about that later, or possibly getting something done about that at the same time. But next up, I'm going to set the clock up. I'm not going to take the crank out of the lathe. In fact, I'll keep the camera running. I'll just put it down over here, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the clock from there to this worn timing side journal and just see what sort of run out figures we might get on that. So if you bear with me, I'll just put this down for a moment, and I'll move my gauge up here, and we'll have a look, see what we got, what kind of play we got, or run out, variation, whatever you want to call it, we might have here. Right, let's have a look. Once again I got that set up showing 0. I'm expecting quite large amounts here. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, that now is quite well out of round, you see. That's probably about 6,000ths of an inch out of round at that particular point of rotation. I'll move in a little, clout the web of the crank before long. Yeah, we've got a lot of run out there, so that would need a good grinding to true up, and depending on the measurement of the diameter of it, it may be within regrind specs. So that'll be the first thing to look at. If that is within specs for a regrind and an undersized timing side bush, we can go ahead with anything else that might be required. But last up, I'll grip it in the chuck of the lathe by the end of the crankshaft where the alternator rotor fits, and we'll see that there's quite an alarming run out there, and that is due to uneven wear. I think we've had an alternator rotor slapping around on the shaft at some time in its life, and it's just sort of worn it out around and off out of centre, and we'll see in a separate video that I'll link up with this one what sort of throw that's producing. But just to round off with this BSA A65 crank, I've now moved it so that it's gripped by the portion of the main shaft that the alternator rotor fits on, and obviously I haven't got it located by the centre at this end anymore, because what I'm about to do, it would be pointless doing that. I'll rotate it, and one full rotation of that clock face there is a millimetre. So we've got over a millimetre, or over 40 thousandths of an inch if you prefer, of run out there now, and that is thanks to some strange and uneven wear on this portion of the crankshaft. Whether the camera will pick it up, just see a sort of faint line just where the shaft begins to merge with the portion that's got the splines on it. There's a line, and I can feel it with my fingernail. There's actually a bit of a step there, but that line and step doesn't run all the way around the shaft, so clearly there's been an alternator rotor at some time in this crank's life, hammering and banging away, rattling around on the end of the shaft there, causing some quite severe wear, and causing that step and the run out figure that we're seeing there. So I'm hoping also that, provided everything else can be dealt with successfully, which I'm now hoping it is possible to do so, that at the end might be the least of our worries, and perhaps that can even be turned down and a suitable sleeve made up to accommodate the alternator rotor and make a good true fit for that. But we've already seen that between the splines, the spline portion of the drive side main shaft and this end of the timing side shaft, we can get a very respectable set of readings when we rotate it with the clocks on the shafts. So it's got its possibilities, and I'm going to have to try and figure out again how I'm going to get that sludge trap plug out of there that's had about at least 8 big centre punch marks belted into it by someone who got carried away. They only needed to put 1 in, 2 at most, but there we are. So it looks like this crank might not be heading for the bin straight away. I'll certainly, I think I'll get it up to the guy who does my regrinds and rebores and so on, and ask him to have a look at it and see what he thinks of it now that I've done this, because I was expecting more horrendous run out. At the beginning I even thought that somewhere between there and there was a bend that we didn't want, but it turns out that obviously between there and there it's running pretty much true. So it's worth looking further into before it is actually written off as scrap, because the big end journals are good, so that's one plus point for it. And if I was to buy another crank, who knows what nasty little hidden surprises there might be there. So I'll get this looked at, I think, and fingers crossed we might be able to save it. Well, here I am back with the BSA A65 crank and part of the engine bottom end here, and I've already got the timing side bush removed from the crankcase, and there's heavy wear, we already know that, and we've actually got a plan coming together. I've spoken to the guy who does my rebores and regrinds and stuff like that, and on the strength of our conversation I've ordered a new timing side bush to a minus 20 thousandths of an inch undersize. I've also ordered a new thrust washer as well that goes with it, this particular kind. There's about a 2,000th of an inch take up in the fit of this bush when it's pressed fully home into the casing, but there's a damn sight more than 2/1000 of an inch there, that's for sure, so that's very worn. I can't really sort of share it on the camera, but you can take my word for it that there's quite a step and there's ridges in that thing. It's very, very worn, and I already know that there's quite a bit of wear on this. Probably, I would say by my rather crude measuring methods, that this is probably a very worn 10 thou undersize grind we're dealing with there, and I'm pretty sure that a -20 will get it. So what we're going to do this time is do something slightly different to what I've done in the past, which has worked alright, where I've got my crank journals reground when I've wanted them done, and I've bought the appropriate undersize of timing side bush. And from experience I know that if the bush just fits, literally just fits over the journal before it's fitted to the crankcase, the chances are when it's pressed in, the crank won't go into it because of that 2/1000 of an inch or so take up. So what I have done in the past a couple of times, and it's worked, is to just very, very lightly open out the bore of the timing side bush to increase it by about 2/1000 of an inch in diameter, so that when it's fitted in the crankcase everything works okay and the crank fits nicely in it. But this time I'm going to try something new, and I've been talking to my regrind guy, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the new timing side bush, undersized, fit it into the crankcase, and then take the crankcase and the crank along to him, and he will grind the timing side journal to exactly suit the requirements to get a good fit in the bush, which will already be pressed in. So that will save me having a mess about machining it. So we'll just get that as it comes out the box, fit it, and then the crank journal will be ground to suit the fit that we end up with once the new bush is in there. So that's what we're doing. And then when we're over that hurdle, I've spoken to him about this business of the drive side inner race of the roller bearing being a loose fit, and I don't think that's a problem any longer. I think we can come up with something that will sort that out. And I've also had the sludge trap plug and the sludge trap tube removed. Look at all those punch marks I had to drill out of that, and then I had to heat it up with the gas, but I got it moving with the impact driver, so that's out. And actually the sludge trap, to be fair, was quite clean in there, so it must have been done quite recently when this was last rebuilt. And as I've already said, the big ends feel good, although I'll get a second opinion off John, who does me regrinds and will be dealing with this, but I'm pretty sure that we can stick with these as they are, clean everything up, regrind that, fit the timing side bush as described, and probably shim up the fit of the inner race of the bearing on this side, and we should be back in business, all being well. So I've got to wait now for the post to arrive and get this lot up for John to have a look at it, and we'll see what happens after that. But there's a little bit of hope and a glimmer of light at the end of the BSA A65 tunnel at the moment.